The heavy iron doors of St. Jude's Free Clinic didn't just open, they buckled. Then came the smell. Not just the copper-penny stench of arterial blood, but the suffocating ozone-heavy pheromones of 3 frantic alphas. The waiting room emptied in 8 seconds flat. Nurses scrambled out the fire escape. Patients bolted into the alley rain. Only Dr. Liam Gallagher remained snapping on a pair of blue nitrile gloves as a bleeding empire was dragged onto his linoleum floor. It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, which meant the clinic smelled like cheap bleach and old mistakes. Liam was leaning against the nurse's station, a lukewarm cup of vending machine coffee in one hand, staring at the rain lashing against the reinforced glass of the front windows. He was 28, chronically sleep-deprived, and running on 3 hours of rest, and a heavy-duty scent blocker patch slapped over his scent gland. Being an Omega in the Narrows wasn't a death sentence, but it was a liability. Being an Omega doctor in an underfunded clinic was just asking for burnout. Then the front doors exploded inward. The security lock snapped with a sharp metallic whine, the reinforced glass shivering but holding in its wire mesh. The wind howled in bringing the bitter November rain with it, but the weather was instantly overpowered by the sheer crushing weight of the pheromones that flooded the room. It was pure, unadulterated alpha panic. It smelled like scorched earth-cracked asphalt and ozone. It hit the back of Liam's throat like a physical blow, heavy enough to make his knees instinctively want to lock a primal biological response he had spent 8 years in medical school training out of his system. Brenda, the beta receptionist who usually had nerves of steel, took one look at the men crossing the threshold, grabbed her purse, and shoved herself through the sliding glass window of the dispensary, sprinting for the back exit. A teenager waiting for asthma medication dropped his inhaler and bolted out the side door. Liam didn't move. He set his coffee down. He pulled a box of nitrile gloves from the wall mount. 3 men moved into the harsh fluorescent light. They wore tailored suits that probably cost more than the clinic's annual operating budget, but the wool and silk were ruined, soaked in rainwater and something dark and sticky. The 2 men on the outside were built like brick walls, their jaws set tight, their eyes scanning the room with the frantic, lethal energy of cornered predators. Between them, they carried a 3rd man. He was younger, his head lolling against the shoulder of the man on his right. His trench coat was thoroughly soaked in blood, the crimson pooling on the scuffed linoleum beneath their polished shoes. "Where is the doctor?" The man on the left roared. His voice rattled the plastic chairs. The sheer command in his tone was laced with alpha dominance, a heavy, suffocating wave meant to force compliance. Liam snapped the second glove onto his wrist. The latex snapped loud in the empty room. "Stop yelling! You're sucking up his oxygen." The 3 men stopped. The alphas stared at him, their pupils blown wide with adrenaline and aggression. The oldest of them, a silver-haired man with eyes like chipped flint, bared his teeth. Liam recognized him not from the streets, but from the news. Arthur Callahan, the head of the Callahan Syndicate. The men bleeding on Liam's floor weren't just gangbangers, they were royalty. "You—" Arthur snarled, his voice dropping to a deadly gravelly register. "You save my son, or I burn this building down with you inside it." Liam pushed off the counter. He didn't submit. He didn't bare his neck. He walked forward, his eyes fixed entirely on the unconscious man suspended between the 2 enforcers. "Trauma Bay 1, end of the hall on the left." Liam set his voice flat, devoid of the tremor Arthur clearly expected. "Move, now." For a split second, Arthur looked like he was going to tear Liam's throat out for the disrespect. But the young man groaned a wet, rattling sound, and the alpha's fury instantly dissolved back into frantic desperation. They practically carried him down the hall, their heavy boots leaving smeared red footprints all the way to the sterile white room. "Get him on the table, strip the coat. I need to see the wound," Liam ordered, kicking the doorstop out of the way. The enforcer, a giant of a man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, hesitated. "Don't touch him. If you want to play bodyguard, take him to a morgue." Liam cut in sharply. He grabbed a pair of trauma shears from the metal tray. "If you want him to breathe in 5 minutes, back up." Arthur grabbed the enforcer's shoulder, yanking him back. Do what he says. Liam moved in. Up close, the damage was catastrophic. The young Alpha Caleb, if Liam remembered the society pages correctly, was pale as wax. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead with cold sweat. Liam jammed the shears into the collar of the bloody trench coat and cut downward, slicing through thick wool a silk tie and a tailored dress shirt in one fluid, brutal motion. He peeled the fabric back. The smell of fresh hot blood hit him metallic and cloying. 2 bullet holes. One in the right shoulder a clean through and through. The second was lower right below the rib cage on the left side. It wasn't clean. The tissue was jagged, bubbling slightly with every shallow breath Caleb took. Tension pneumothorax. His lung was collapsing, filling the chest cavity with air, and blood crushing his heart. "He's not breathing right," Arthur said, his voice cracking. The mob boss was pacing, his heavy boots squeaking on the floor, his pheromones spiking so violently Liam could taste copper on his tongue. "Why is he turning blue? Fix him." "I need silence," Liam barked. He didn't look up. "He's got a collapsed lung. I need to relieve the pressure or his heart stops." Liam grabbed a betadine swab, swiping it roughly over the pale skin between Caleb's ribs. He didn't bother with local anesthetic. There was no time, and the kid was out cold anyway. He grabbed a scalpel, his hand steady, and made a sharp, clean incision. Caleb's body convulsed violently. A deep guttural growl ripped from his throat, a raw, instinctual alpha sound that rattled the metal trays. His eyes snapped open. They weren't human eyes in that moment. They were pure, blown-out amber, feral, and unseen, driven entirely by pain and the instinct to kill whatever was hurting him. Before Liam could blink, Caleb's hand shot up. His blood-slicked fingers locked around Liam's wrist like a vice. The grip was bone-crushing. "Hey!" Liam said, his voice low, deliberately dropping into a calm, steady cadence. He leaned closer, ignoring the frantic shouting of Arthur behind him. He looked directly into those wild amber eyes. "Look at me! I'm pulling the air out. You have to let me do it." Caleb's chest heaved. He was suffocating, drowning in his own blood. The grip on Liam's wrist tightened until Liam felt his radius grind against his ulna. But slowly the fog in Caleb's eyes began to part. He saw the harsh lights, the peeling paint on the ceiling, and finally Liam. Caleb's nostrils flared. Even dying, his biology was working. He was cataloging Liam's scent. Despite the heavy blockers Liam wore, the sweat and stress were melting the adhesive. A faint, sharp note of white tea and crushed mint, Liam's natural omega scent slipped into the bloody air. Caleb's jaw went slack. The feral light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by profound, agonizing confusion. His thumb weakly stroked the inside of Liam's wrist, smearing blood over Liam's pulse point. Then his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness again, his hand dropping off the table. Liam let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He grabbed the heavy-gauge needle and the chest tube. "Hold him down," he ordered the 2 older alphas. "This is going to get messy." The next 45 minutes were a blur of organized violence. Medicine in the Narrows wasn't about pristine operating theaters or robotic precision. It was about stopping the red from leaving the body by any means necessary. Liam drove the chest tube between Caleb's ribs. The resulting hiss of escaping trapped air was loud, followed instantly by a thick gush of dark blood into the plastic suction canister. Caleb's chest visibly deflated, his breathing losing that awful, ragged catch. "His pressure is dropping," Liam muttered to himself, glancing at the ancient analog monitor he'd hastily hooked to Caleb's uninjured arm. The machine beeped a frantic, erratic tempo. He moved lower, examining the entry wound in the abdomen. The bullet had missed the liver, but the sheer volume of blood pooling in the abdominal cavity meant it had clipped an artery. "I need to open him up. Find the bleeder," Liam said. He looked over his shoulder. Arthur and the giant enforcer were standing against the far wall, looking completely out of their element. "You, go to the cabinet in the hall. 3rd drawer down. Bring me 6 bags of O-negative blood. Now." The enforcer hesitated, looking at Arthur for permission. "Did you not hear me?" Liam snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Move! The enforcer scrambled out the door. Liam turned back to Caleb. He clamped the edges of the wound using suction to clear the blinding well of blood. His hands moved with mechanical efficiency, relying on years of muscle memory. He found the torn vessel a mesenteric branch. Not catastrophic, but deadly if left open. He clamped it, his shoulders aching as he leaned over the table, sweat stinging his eyes. The room was heavy with silence broken only by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the squelch of the suction machine. Arthur watched from the corner. The mob boss had stopped pacing. His sharp eyes were fixed entirely on Liam's hands. He was watching the way Liam didn't shake, the way Liam didn't flinch when the blood sprayed across his scrubs. "You don't smell like a beta," Arthur said suddenly. His voice was quieter now, the panic replaced by a cold, calculating edge. "But you don't smell like an omega either." Liam didn't look up. He threaded a suture through the torn artery, pulling it taut. "I smell like antiseptic in a 12-hour shift. Hand me those gauze pads." Arthur didn't move. "I know every doctor in this district. Who are you?" "Liam Gallagher." Liam replied, packing the wound tightly to stem the residual seeping. "I've been here 4 years. You don't know me because your people usually go to the private clinics in the Heights, or they die in the gutter. This is a free clinic." The enforcer returned, dumping the chilled bags of blood onto the metal tray. Liam quickly hooked 2 of them up to a rapid infuser, attaching the line to the IV he'd jammed into Caleb's neck. As the cold blood hit his system, Caleb let out a low groan. His color began to return, the waxy pallor shifting to a bruised, exhausted gray. His body was doing the rest. Alpha physiology was terrifyingly resilient. Now that the mechanical issues, the collapsed lung, the arterial bleed were fixed, his accelerated cellular regeneration was already kicking in, closing the smaller capillaries. Liam began the tedious process of stitching the abdominal muscle wall, then the skin. He worked in silence, the adrenaline slowly leaving his system, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. His lower back screamed in protest. His head throbbed. He tied off the final stitch on Caleb's shoulder wound and snipped the thread. He dropped the bloody shears into a metal basin with a loud clatter. "He'll live," Liam said, stepping back from the table. He stripped off his blood-soaked gloves, throwing them into the biohazard bin. "The chest tube needs to stay in for at least 48 hours. He needs broad-spectrum antibiotics and rest. If he moves too much, he'll rip the internal sutures." Arthur stepped forward, finally allowing his shoulders to drop a fraction of an inch. He looked down at his son. Caleb's chest was rising and falling in a steady, even rhythm. The monitor beeped calmly. "You did good, Doc." The enforcer rumbled, his deep voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. Liam walked over to the corner sink and turned on the tap. He squirted harsh pink chemical soap into his hand, scrubbing viciously up to his elbows. The water ran thick and red, then pink, and finally clear. He stared at his own reflection in the small mirror above the sink. There was a smear of blood on his cheekbone. His eyes looked hollow. He reached up to his neck. The scent patch was peeling at the edges, saturated with sweat. He pressed it back down, but he knew it was useless. The heavy exertion had burned right through the chemical blockers. He turned the water off. He grabbed a paper towel, drying his hands, and turned back to the room. Arthur Callahan was looking directly at him. The older alpha's head was tilted slightly, his nostrils flaring just a fraction. He had caught the scent. "White tea," Arthur murmured. "And mint." Liam's jaw tightened. "Take your son and get out of my clinic." Arthur didn't leave. Instead, he pulled a steel chair from the corner and dragged it to the side of the gurney, sitting down heavily. He looked like an old, tired man for a second before the mask of the syndicate boss slammed back into place. "We can't move him," Arthur said flatly. "You just said it yourself, the chest tube. I have 2 recovery cots in the back," Liam said, crossing his arms over his chest. He deliberately kept his posture wide defensive. "He can stay until morning. Then you arrange a private ambulance to take him to one of your clean houses. I'm not running a mob hotel." "No," Arthur said. He steepled his fingers, his cold eyes tracking Liam. The Baronis hit us tonight. It was an ambush. They have the hospitals locked down watching the doors for gunshot wounds. If I move him, they'll find him. He stays here. Absolutely not, Liam said, his voice rising. This is a free clinic. I have pregnant women and sick kids coming through those doors at 8 a.m. I'm not putting a target on this building because your kid caught a bullet in a turf war. The enforcer took a step toward Liam, his frame swelling with intimidation. You watch how you speak to Mr. Callahan. Liam didn't back down. He looked from the giant to Arthur. I just saved his life. You owe me, and I'm cashing in that favor right now. Get him out. Arthur let out a low, dry chuckle. It was a humorless sound. You have guts, Gallagher. Most Omegas would be curled under the desk by now, just from the residual stress in the air. But you stood there and stitched up my boy while I was breathing down your neck. My biology doesn't dictate my competence, Liam said coldly. Clearly, Arthur agreed. He reached into his ruined suit jacket and pulled out a thick leather-bound checkbook. He clicked a pen and began writing. You need to understand something, Dr. Gallagher. I'm not asking you. He ripped the check out and tossed it onto the metal tray next to the bloody scalpels. Liam didn't look at it. I don't want your money. It's $100,000, Arthur said softly. Consider it a retainer. Caleb stays here until he's strong enough to walk out under his own power. You will close the clinic. You will put a sign on the door saying it's closed for renovations. You will stay here in this building and monitor him 24 hours a day. I am not abandoning my patients. If you don't, Arthur interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. I will have my men burn this place to the foundation, with or without you in it, and then I will take my son anyway. The silence in the trauma bay was absolute. Liam stared at Arthur, his mind racing. He knew the Callahans' reputation. They weren't bluffing. If Liam pushed too hard, they would destroy the clinic, and thousands of people in the Narrows would lose their only access to medical care. Liam looked past Arthur down at the man on the gurney. Caleb's head shifted on the thin pillow. His eyes fluttered open heavy with painkillers and exhaustion. This time, there was no feral panic. His gaze was hazy, sweeping the room before locking onto Liam. The connection was immediate and jarring. Even heavily sedated Caleb's presence was a physical weight in the room. His scent, which had been masked by blood and sweat earlier, was slowly filtering into the sterile air. It smelled like cedarwood dark coffee and something sweet like burnt sugar. It bypassed Liam's logic, curling directly into the primitive part of his brain, making the hairs on his arms stand up. Caleb looked at Liam, his amber eyes tracking the dried blood on Liam's scrubs, the exhaustion in his shoulders, the defiance in his jaw. Caleb's dry lips parted. You stayed. His voice was barely a rasp, a broken whisper that barely carried over the hum of the heart monitor. Liam swallowed hard. He looked away from Caleb, fixing his gaze back on Arthur. The sheer injustice of it burned in his chest, but he knew when he was outplayed. He picked up the check from the metal tray, folding it in half. You bring your own food, Liam said, his voice laced with bitter resignation. And if anyone shoots up my lobby, I'm pulling his chest tube out myself. Arthur smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. We have a deal, Dr. Gallagher. Liam turned his back on the mob boss, walking over to check Caleb's IV line. As he leaned over, Caleb's hand moved his large calloused fingers weakly wrapping around the hem of Liam's scrub top. Liam looked down. Caleb wasn't looking at him with alpha dominance or mafia entitlement. He was looking at Liam like he was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Stay, Caleb whispered, his eyes sliding shut again. Liam stood frozen in the cold, flickering light of the clinic, realizing with a sinking dread that the hardest part of the night wasn't the surgery. It was what came next. By 6 a.m., St. Jude's no longer felt like a clinic. It felt like a bunker. Arthur Callahan had departed in a heavily armored SUV, leaving behind a thick envelope of cash, a satellite phone, and the giant enforcer whose name Liam learned was Briggs. Briggs spent the first hour dragging a heavy filing cabinet in front of the reinforced rear exit and taping thick black trash bags over the frosted glass of the front doors. Liam spent that hour systematically destroying his own schedule. He sat in the cramped back office, calling his regular patients one by one. Water pipe burst, he lied, staring at the blood drying under his fingernails. Closed for emergency maintenance. Go to the county hospital if it gets worse. He hated the lie. He hated the slight panicked hitch in Mrs. Gable's voice when he told her she couldn't get her insulin today. He hung up the phone and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. The adrenaline had completely metabolized, leaving behind a hollow grating exhaustion that made his joints ache. He peeled the ruined scent blocker off his neck, tossing it into the trash. There was no point anymore. The secret was out, and his skin was raw from the adhesive. He walked back out to the makeshift trauma bay. Caleb was awake. He wasn't thrashing or panicked like before. He lay perfectly still on the narrow cot, his head turned slightly to watch Liam enter the room. The harsh fluorescent lights threw sharp shadows across his face, emphasizing the sharp cut of his jaw and the heavy bruised exhaustion under his amber eyes. Liam stopped at the foot of the bed, picking up the metal chart he'd hastily scribbled notes on. Pain level. Manageable, Caleb said. His voice was a dry, scraping rasp. Liar, Liam replied flatly. He didn't look up from the chart. You have a piece of ribbed plastic shoved between your intercostal muscles and a 3-inch incision through your abdominal wall. Breathing feels like swallowing glass. Give me a number. Caleb watched him for a long moment. 8. I'll push another 2 milligrams of morphine. Liam moved to the IV pole. He grabbed a pre-filled syringe from his pocket, swabbed the port on the line, and injected the clear liquid. Caleb's eyes tracked Liam's hands. Then his gaze drifted up, landing precisely on the unprotected scent gland on the left side of Liam's neck. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating dominance from earlier. It was an involuntary biological reaction. Caleb's scent, cedarwood and burnt sugar, thickened, carrying a low protective undertone that made Liam's teeth ache. Stop that, Liam said. He checked the seal on the chest tube drainage system. Stop what? Scenting me. Liam said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. I am your physician, not an unbonded omega you picked up at a club. Keep your pheromones in check or I'll sedate you until Thursday. Caleb actually smiled. It was a faint, painful pulling of his lips, but it was there. You don't act like an omega. And you don't act like a man who almost died 3 hours ago. Lie still. Liam pulled a rolling stool over and sat down beside the cot. He grabbed a pen light. Look straight ahead. He clicked the light on, passing it briefly over Caleb's pupils. They constricted evenly. No concussion. As Liam leaned in, he felt the heavy radiating heat coming off Caleb's skin. It was standard alpha physiology. Their core temperature naturally ran higher, a byproduct of their accelerated metabolism. But up close, the sheer density of the man was overwhelming. Caleb wasn't just built. He was engineered for violence. Deep scars crisscrossed his collarbone, disappearing under the white bandages. Why did you stay? Caleb asked quietly. The morphine was hitting his system, smoothing out the harsh edges of his voice. Because your father threatened to burn my clinic down, Liam answered, clicking the pen light off and tucking it into his pocket. Before that, Caleb pressed. His heavy amber eyes were fixed on Liam's face, refusing to look away. When we came through the doors, the waiting room emptied. Your receptionist ran. You put on gloves. I'm a doctor. You were bleeding. You knew who we were. A bullet hole is a bullet hole, regardless of whose name is on the tax return, Liam said. He stood up, pushing the stool back. I'm going to get you a glass of water. Try not to rip your stitches while I'm gone. He turned and walked out of the room. He could feel Caleb's eyes on his spine until he turned the corner. Liam leaned against the cold plaster wall of the hallway, taking a slow, shaky breath. He closed his eyes. The burnt sugar scent was clinging to his clothes, sinking into the fibers of his scrubs. It was a nightmare. Alphas like Caleb Callahan didn't see people. They saw territory. and Liam had just unknowingly put himself right in the middle of a war zone. The 48-hour mark was always the crucible. By Wednesday night, the rain had stopped, replaced by a biting, humid freeze that seeped through the poorly insulated walls of the clinic. Liam was running on a collective 4 hours of sleep snatched in 15-minute increments on the vinyl couch in his office. At 11 p.m., the monitor beside Caleb's bed began to chime a steady warning rhythm. Liam shoved himself off the couch, his joints popping, and hurried down the hall. Briggs was standing by the door, his arms crossed, looking uselessly at the machine. "He's burning up," Briggs rumbled. Liam pushed past him. Caleb was shivering violently, his teeth chattering against each other. The bruised pallor of his skin had been replaced by a deep, flushed red. The sweat was rolling off him in a sheet soaking the thin cotton blanket. Liam checked the digital thermometer. 103.8. No, sir, infection, Liam muttered. He checked the abdominal dressing. It was clean, no signs of purulent drainage, which meant the fever was systemic. The trauma of the lung collapse and the blood loss had compromised his immune system. "Is he going to die?" Briggs asked, his hand dropping to the holster at his hip. It wasn't a threat, just a nervous tick. "Not today," Liam snapped. "Go to the break room freezer, bring me every ice pack in there, and a basin of cold water." Liam stripped the blanket off Caleb. The sudden exposure to the cold air made Caleb groan, his back arching off the mattress. A deep territorial growl ripped from his throat, the sound vibrating in his chest cavity. "Caleb, stop!" Liam commanded, pressing a firm hand against the center of Caleb's chest to hold him down. "You're going to tear the tube out. Look at me." Caleb's eyes snapped open. The amber was swallowed entirely by the blown-out black of his pupils. He was delirious. His hand flew up, wrapping around Liam's wrist, just like he had in the trauma bay. But this time it wasn't a desperate plea for air, it was a possessive grip. His thumb dragged over Liam's pulse point, exactly where his scent gland sat. Liam flinched. A jolt of pure instinctual submission threatened to buckle his knees. The biological imperative of an omega to soothe a distressed alpha was overwhelming, a heavy dragging weight in his blood. Liam ground his teeth together, forcing the instinct down with years of practiced discipline. "Let go," Liam said sharply. Caleb didn't let go. He pulled. With surprising strength for a man running a 104-degree fever, Caleb dragged Liam down. Liam stumbled his free hand, catching the edge of the mattress to keep from collapsing entirely onto Caleb's chest. Their faces were inches apart. The scent of cedarwood was scorching hot, stripped of all its sweet notes, leaving behind pure, volatile aggression. "Mine—" Caleb rasped the word, barely a breath, against Liam's mouth. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. He didn't pull away. He knew better than to trigger a pursuit instinct in a delirious alpha. Instead, he leaned in a fraction of an inch, keeping his eyes locked on Caleb's, and deliberately flooded the air with his own scent. White tea and mint. Cool, clinical, calm. "I am not yours," Liam said, his voice dropping an octave, steady and unyielding. "I am your doctor, and you are burning up. Let me go so I can fix it." For 10 agonizing seconds, the two of them stayed locked in a silent standoff of biology and willpower, the mob air and the street clinic doctor. Slowly, the tension in Caleb's jaw eased. The possessive grip on Liam's wrist loosened, sliding down until his fingers were just resting against Liam's palm. He closed his eyes, his breathing ragged. Briggs returned with the ice packs. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the scene, his eyes widening. He clearly felt the suffocating tension in the room. "Put them here," Liam said smoothly, not missing a beat. He stepped back from the bed, his legs shaking slightly beneath his scrubs. For the next 2 hours, Liam worked mechanically. He packed the ice packs under Caleb's armpits and around his groin to cool the major arteries. He pushed a heavy dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics directly into the IV line, followed by antipyretics. He sat beside the bed with a wet cloth wiping the sweat from Caleb's face, his neck, his heavy shoulders. Around 2 a.m., the fever broke. Caleb stopped shivering. His breathing deepened, evening out. Liam sat back in the rolling stool, dropping the damp cloth into the plastic basin. Caleb opened his eyes. The delirium was gone. He looked at the ice packs, then at Liam. "You're a stubborn bastard," Caleb murmured, his voice hoarse. "It's a prerequisite for the job," Liam replied, leaning his elbows on his knees. "I remember grabbing you," Caleb said. He turned his head on the pillow, looking directly at Liam. There was no apology in his tone, just a careful calculation. "I remember your scent. You dropped it intentionally to calm me down. I didn't know Omegas could weaponize that." "I didn't weaponize it. I used it as a sedative. It's a tool, just like the scalpel." Caleb watched him. "You hate being what you are." Liam let out a dry, bitter laugh. "I hate the assumptions that come with it. The assumption that because I smell like tea leaves, I should be soft, compliant, waiting for some alpha to come along and bite my neck so I can build a nest in a penthouse somewhere." Liam pointed to the bloody floor. "I belong here, fixing the things people like you break." Caleb didn't look offended. He looked at the cracked ceiling tiles. "I didn't ask for the life I have either. I was born into it. You think I want to be shot in an alley over a shipping container dispute? You could walk away." Caleb looked back at him, his eyes heavy with a cynical kind of sorrow. "No, I really can't. If I walk away, my father's enemies kill me anyway, and my family kills the people I care about for the betrayal. There is no exit strategy, Liam." It was the first time Caleb had used his first name. It sounded strange coming from him, intimate. Liam didn't have an answer to that. He just reached out, checking Caleb's pulse one last time. "Try to sleep. I'm pulling the chest tube tomorrow." Thursday morning brought an unnatural quiet to the Narrows. The relentless rain had returned, drumming a steady, numbing beat against the roof of the clinic. Liam was prepping a sterile tray by the counter. It was time. Caleb's lung had fully re-expanded, and the fluid drainage had dropped to less than 50 milliliters in 24 hours. Leaving the tube in any longer would just increase the risk of a secondary infection. "This is going to hurt," Liam said, turning around. Caleb was sitting up slightly, the head of the cot elevated. He looked drastically better. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by the natural olive tone of his skin. The heavy muscle of his chest and arms looked relaxed, though Liam knew it was a deceptive calm. "I've had worse," Caleb said, watching Liam snap on a fresh pair of gloves. Before Liam could take a step toward the bed, the heavy thud of footsteps echoed from the front of the clinic. It wasn't the rhythmic pacing Briggs usually did. It was fast, urgent. Briggs appeared in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. The heavy Glock he usually kept holstered was drawn pressed flush against his thigh. "We got a problem," Briggs said, his voice a low rumble. "Someone's rattling the security gate out front, trying to jimmy the deadbolt." Liam froze, the sterile scalpel handle in his hand. "A patient." "Patient's knock," Briggs said grimly. "This guy's picking the lock. I saw a black SUV idling half a block down. It looks like the Barone's." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caleb's entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. The relaxed patient vanished. In his place was the apex predator, the heir to the syndicate. His jaw locked. His amber eyes narrowed into lethal slits. He ripped the blanket off his legs and swung them over the side of the narrow cot. "What the hell are you doing?" Liam hissed, dropping the tray onto the counter with a loud clatter. "Briggs, take the right angle down the hall. Shoot through the dry wall if he breaches the glass." Caleb ordered, completely ignoring Liam. He grabbed the IV pole, his knuckles white, and started to pull the needle out of the back of his own hand. Liam moved faster than he thought possible. He crossed the room and slammed his hand over Caleb's, pinning it to the pole. "You are not getting up," Liam snarled. Caleb looked at him, his pheromones spiking violently, ozone gunpowder and roaring cedar. "Move, Liam. If they get through that door, they will kill everyone in this building. If you stand up, you will rip your abdominal sutures, bleed out internally, and die on my floor." Liam fired back. He didn't flinch away from the alpha aura. He leaned into it. Briggs can handle one guy at a door. You're going to sit back down, shut up, and let me do my job. Briggs looked between the two of them, clearly torn between his boss's orders and the sheer, unadulterated fury of the small Omega doctor. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed down the hallway. The front door lock was giving way. Caleb's free hand shot out, grabbing Liam by the hip to shove him behind him. It was a purely protective instinct, a biological need to put his own body between the threat and his Omega. Liam didn't budge. Instead, he drove his elbow sharply into the mattress right next to Caleb's thigh, bracing himself, and shoved Caleb backward by the uninjured shoulder. "I said sit down," Liam roared. It wasn't an alpha command. It was the absolute, unquestionable authority of a trauma surgeon in his own domain. Caleb hit the mattress with a heavy grunt. The jolt sent a spike of agonizing pain through his side, forcing him to gasp, his hands flying to his ribs. "Briggs," Liam shouted, not taking his eyes off Caleb. "Go." Briggs didn't hesitate this time. He bolted down the hallway, the rubber soles of his boots squeaking against the linoleum. Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Caleb was breathing hard, glaring up at Liam. The physical exertion and the pain had brought a sheen of sweat back to his forehead. From the front of the clinic came the sudden deafening crack of a gunshot. Liam flinched his shoulders, pulling up, but he didn't move away from Caleb. Then came the sound of shattered glass, a heavy thud, and finally the rapid squeal of tires outside on the wet asphalt. 2 minutes later, Briggs walked back into the room. He was breathing heavily, a streak of blood on his knuckles. He holstered his weapon. "Scout," Briggs reported flatly. "He got the door open. I put one in the wall next to his head, caught him with a right hook. He ran back to the SUV. They're gone." Caleb slowly let out a breath. The feral tension bled out of his muscles, leaving him looking exhausted. He looked up at Liam, who was still standing over him, his hand gripping the edge of the mattress. "You pushed me," Caleb said quietly. "You were being stupid," Liam replied, stepping back. His heart was hammering so hard he felt slightly nauseous, but his hands were perfectly steady. He walked over to the tray and picked up the sterile equipment. "Now lie back. Take a deep breath." Caleb didn't argue this time. He laid his head back against the pillow, watching Liam with an expression that was entirely unreadable. Liam moved to Caleb's side. He cut the suture holding the thick plastic tube to Caleb's skin. He placed a heavy square of petroleum gauze over the entry site. "On 3, Liam said, his voice dropping into a calm, clinical cadence. "Take a deep breath and hold it. Do not exhale until I tell you." Caleb nodded. 1, 2, 3. "Breathe in." Caleb inhaled sharply, his chest expanding. Liam grabbed the tube and pulled. It was a visceral, horrible sound, a wet, sliding suction, as 12 inches of ribbed plastic was dragged out of the pleural cavity between Caleb's ribs. Caleb's eyes clamped shut, a stifled, agonizing groan escaping his gritted teeth. His hand shot out blindly. Liam caught it. He didn't think about it. He just dropped the bloody tube into the basin, pressed the heavy gauze firmly over the hole with his right hand, and let Caleb crush his left hand in a vice grip. "Hold your breath," Liam ordered softly. He quickly taped the dressing down, creating an airtight seal. "Okay, exhale." Caleb let out a long, shaky breath. He didn't let go of Liam's hand. He opened his eyes, looking up at the doctor. The pain was receding, replaced by a profound, heavy silence. Caleb's thumb brushed slowly over Liam's knuckles. "Thank you." Liam looked down at their joined hands. The blood on Caleb's skin contrasted sharply with the blue nitrile of Liam's glove. He should pull away. He should maintain the boundary. Instead, Liam squeezed back just once before gently pulling his hand free. "You're welcome," Liam said. "Now we just have to keep you alive long enough for your father to come pick you up." The extraction happened on a Friday. It wasn't loud and it wasn't violent. It was a suffocating display of sheer, unadulterated power. At 11 p.m. 4 black armored SUVs rolled up to the curb of St. Jude's. The rain had turned to sleet, coating the streets of the Narrows in a treacherous layer of black ice. The clinic doors, temporarily repaired with thick plywood and heavy-duty deadbolts, swung open. Arthur Callahan walked in first. The silver-haired alpha was flanked by 4 new enforcers, their tailored coats hiding the bulk of tactical vests. Behind them walked a man carrying a leather medical bag clean-cut, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and beta suppressants. A private concierge doctor. Liam was standing at the nurse's station counting inventory. He didn't flinch when the cold wind and the heavy crush of alpha pheromones hit the room. He just closed the metal clipboard. "Dr. Gallagher," Arthur said. The mob boss looked around the dingy lobby, his lip curling slightly at the water stains on the ceiling. "We are moving him." "Good," Liam said flatly. He picked up a manila folder from the counter and handed it to the private doctor. "His chart. His lung is stable, but he's still on heavy broad-spectrum antibiotics. The internal sutures need another 10 days before you even think about letting him train or lift anything over 10 pounds. He needs a follow-up chest X-ray by Tuesday." The private doctor took the file, looking at the handwritten notes with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "I assure you I have it under control. We have a state-of-the-art facility at the estate." "Then you shouldn't have any trouble keeping him alive," Liam replied, cutting the man off. He looked past them down the hallway. Caleb was walking toward them. He moved slowly. Every step was a calculated effort, his heavy boots scuffing slightly against the linoleum. He wore dark jeans and a heavy wool sweater that hid the bulk of his bandages, but Liam could see the stiff, unnatural line of his spine. The sheer force of will keeping him upright was staggering. Briggs walked a half-step behind him, ready to catch him, but Caleb waved him off. Caleb stopped in the center of the lobby. He didn't look at his father. He didn't look at the concierge doctor. He looked directly at Liam. "I'm leaving," Caleb said. His voice was still rough, stripped of its usual commanding resonance by the lingering trauma in his chest cavity. "Try not to get shot on the way out," Liam replied. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. He kept his own scent entirely suppressed. He was a stone wall. He had to be. Arthur turned to Liam. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a heavy embossed business card, sliding it across the worn laminate of the counter. "The Barones are handling their own internal restructuring at the moment. They won't be bothering this clinic." Arthur stated his tone, carrying a dark, bloody implication. "You did your job, Gallagher. If you ever decide you're tired of playing savior to the dregs of this city, call that number. I pay my personal staff very well. You wouldn't have to worry about rent or peeling paint or gangbangers kicking your door in." Liam looked at the card. It sat next to a plastic cup holding cheap ballpoint pens. "I don't work for the syndicate." "Everyone works for me eventually." Arthur said, a cold smile touching his eyes. "Some just take longer to realize it." Arthur turned and walked out the door, the concierge doctor and 2 enforcers following him into the freezing sleet. Caleb didn't move. He stood there, the heavy amber of his eyes tracking the exhaustion etched into Liam's face. The bruising under Liam's eyes was dark purple. His scrubs were wrinkled. He smelled like harsh antiseptic soap and stale coffee. "You didn't cash the check," Caleb said softly. "I don't want your money." "It's not blood money, Liam. It's compensation for your time." "It's a leash," Liam corrected sharply, dropping his arms. He stepped forward, closing the distance until he was just 2 feet from the alpha. "I know how this works. You take the money and suddenly you owe a favor, then another. Then you're waking up at 3 a.m. to dig bullets out of men who torture people for a living. I am a doctor, not a mechanic for your war machine. Leave." Caleb's jaw tightened. The scent of cedarwood spiked heavy with a complicated mix of frustration and an undeniable territorial reluctance to leave. He wanted to push. Liam could see it in the way Caleb's hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to use his size, his pheromones, his sheer biological weight to force Liam to submit, to soften, to yield. But he didn't. Caleb took a slow, painful breath. He reached out his large hand, moving deliberately. Liam didn't flinch. Caleb's knuckles brushed against the side of Liam's neck, a feather-light touch right over the scent gland. The contrast of the freezing air from the open door and the burning heat of Caleb's skin sent a violent shiver down Liam's spine. "I owe you my life," Caleb murmured, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register that vibrated right in Liam's chest. "I don't forget my debts, and I don't walk away from things that matter." Caleb pulled his hand back. He turned and walked out into the cold. Briggs paused at the door. The giant enforcer looked at Liam, giving a slow, respectful nod before pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The click of the deadbolt locking into place sounded like a gunshot in the empty clinic. Liam stood alone in the lobby. The silence was absolute, heavy, and completely suffocating. He walked over to the front door, staring out the reinforced glass as the taillights of the SUVs disappeared into the sleet. He raised his hand, pressing 2 fingers against his neck where Caleb had touched him. His skin was burning. December hit the Narrows like a sledgehammer. The temperatures plummeted, and with the cold came the seasonal influx of misery. St. Jude's was packed wall to wall every day. Bronchitis, pneumonia, frostbite. The waiting room smelled of wet wool, cheap tobacco, and desperation. 4 weeks had passed since the Callahans left. Liam was running on fumes. He had hired a new receptionist, a gruff, elderly beta named Martha, who wasn't intimidated by the junkies or the gang members. But the medical load was entirely on him. The clinic was severely underfunded. The heating system was failing, rattling violently every time it kicked on. It was 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. The clinic was supposed to close at 7, but Liam was sitting on an exam stool, carefully wrapping a thermal bandage around the frostbitten toes of a homeless man named Eddie. "Keep the socks dry, Eddie, I mean it." Liam said, his voice hoarse. "If these turn black, I have to cut them off. Do you understand me?" "I hear you, Doc," Eddie mumbled, clutching a complimentary cup of hot tea Martha had handed him. Liam finished the wrap and peeled off his gloves. He washed his hands at the corner sink, the cold water making his joints ache. He watched Eddie shuffle out of the room, leaving behind a trail of melted slush. Liam leaned heavily against the counter. He closed his eyes. The exhaustion was bone deep, a heavy anchor dragging him down. But it wasn't just the work. It was the phantom sensations. Sometimes in the dead of night, when he was catching a nap on the office couch, he would wake up in a cold sweat, swearing he could smell burnt sugar and cedarwood. He would turn around in the empty hallways, expecting to see a giant of a man with amber eyes watching him from the shadows. It made him furious. He was a man of science. He understood the biological mechanics of a trauma bond. He understood the omega imperative. But knowing the mechanics didn't stop the aching hollow in his chest. He walked back to his office. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. The check was still there, $100,000. It was enough to buy a new commercial boiler for the building. It was enough to stock the dispensary with pediatric inhalers for the next 3 years. It was enough to hire a part-time nurse. Liam stared at it. He hated the check. He hated what it represented. He slammed the drawer shut. "Doc!" Martha's voice rasped from the doorway. Liam looked up. "I'm off the clock, Martha. Tell them to go to the ER. "Ain't a patient," Martha said. She shifted her weight, looking slightly uneasy. "Or well, maybe he is. Guy in a very expensive coat. Says he needs a follow-up." Liam's heart slammed against his ribs. The rhythm was so violent he actually felt slightly lightheaded. He stood up, smoothing his hands down the front of his scrubs. He walked past Martha down the short hallway and stepped into the waiting room. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered. Caleb Callahan was standing by the reception desk. He looked entirely different. The bruising was gone. The unnatural pallor was replaced by healthy color. He was wearing a charcoal overcoat over a dark suit, the cut of the fabric screaming wealth. He stood perfectly straight, the terrifying physical dominance of his alpha biology radiating off him effortlessly. But he wasn't flanked by guards. Briggs wasn't at the door. The SUVs weren't idling out front. Caleb was alone. He held a large cardboard box in his hands. Liam stopped 10 feet away. He couldn't help it. His nostrils flared slightly, pulling in the scent. The cedar wood was clean, sharp, and deep. It hit Liam's nervous system like a live wire, instantly unraveling the knot of tension he'd been carrying in his shoulders for a month. "We're closed," Liam said. His voice betrayed him. It wasn't the sharp, biting tone he intended. It was quiet. Bare. Caleb set the heavy cardboard box down on the floor. He didn't use an alpha command. He didn't posture. He just looked at Liam, his amber eyes tracking the dark circles under Liam's eyes, the fraying hem of his scrub top, the defensive cross of his arms. "Your receptionist said you needed pediatric albuterol," Caleb said. He pointed to the box. "There are 300 units in there, lab sealed, straight from a pharmaceutical distributor. No blood on them." Liam stared at the box, then back up at Caleb. "Why are you here?" Caleb. "To get my stitches removed," Caleb replied, unbuttoning his overcoat. "They dissolve," Liam shot back. "I told you that before you left. They dissolve in 3 weeks." "Then I'm here for my x-ray." "I don't have an x-ray machine. We sold it for scrap 2 years ago when the tube blew out." Caleb stopped unbuttoning his coat. He looked at Liam, the corner of his mouth twitching upward into a genuine tired smile. "Then I'm just here." Liam didn't kick him out. He told Martha to go home, locked the front doors, and led Caleb into the back office. It was a cramped space dominated by a battered metal desk and filing cabinets that predated the internet. Caleb didn't look out of place despite his suit. He took up the space, naturally sitting down on the worn vinyl couch against the wall. Liam sat behind the desk. He didn't offer Caleb a drink. He just leaned back in his chair and waited. "The Baronis are gone," Caleb said. It wasn't a boast. It was a clinical report. It took 3 weeks to systematically dismantle their supply lines. My father took the north side. I took this district. Liam's jaw tightened. "Congratulations! You're the new king of the slums. Try not to get shot on your throne." "I didn't take it to exploit it," Caleb said quietly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The heavy coat fell open. "I took it so I could set the rules. No more gang crossfire in the streets. No more protection rackets shaking down bodegas. I put the word out. The Narrows is a neutral zone." Liam let out a harsh laugh. "You expect me to believe you became a philanthropist? You're a Callahan." "I'm an alpha who almost drowned in his own blood on your linoleum floor." Caleb corrected his voice, dropping intense and absolute. "I had a lot of time to think while I was staring at your ceiling tiles. You think I'm arrogant. You think I view people as territory. You're right. I do. It's how I was raised. It's my biology." Caleb stood up. He walked over to the desk, standing over Liam. Liam didn't shrink back. He tilted his head up, meeting Caleb's gaze dead on. "But I also know what I want." Caleb continued, his amber eyes burning. "And I know I can't have it by force. If I dragged you out of this clinic, if I put you in a penthouse and covered you in my scent, you would wither. You'd hate me. And I don't want your submission, Liam. I want you." The air in the small office grew incredibly heavy. Caleb's pheromones weren't aggressive. They were a thick, grounding blanket of protection and deep primal longing. It pulled at Liam's omega instincts, a vicious undertow trying to drag him out to sea. Liam gripped the armrests of his chair. "You don't know me. You know a doctor who patched you up. I know a man who stood down 3 armed alphas without breaking a sweat. I know a man who smells like tea leaves but has a spine made of titanium," Caleb countered. He reached across the desk. He didn't grab Liam. He just rested his hand on the desk inches from Liam's. "I'm not asking you to quit. I'm not asking you to take my money or wear my ring tomorrow. I'm asking for a negotiation." Liam looked at the massive, scarred hand resting on his desk. He traced the lines of it with his eyes. "A negotiation." "Yeah," Caleb breathed. "I drop off medical supplies on Tuesdays. Real supplies. No strings. You let me sit in your lobby. You let me take you to dinner when your shift ends. You keep your clinic. You keep your independence." "And what do you get?" Liam asked, his voice a whisper. "I get to know that the man who saved my life isn't starving to death. I get to see if the doctor has a life outside of this building. I get a chance. Caleb's hand shifted, his fingers lightly brushing against Liam's knuckles. Just a chance. Liam looked up. The cynicism he had built up over years of working in the gutter, the heavy armor he wore to survive as an Omega in a city that wanted to consume him, it didn't shatter. But it cracked. Caleb wasn't offering a fairy tale. He wasn't pretending the blood on his hands didn't exist. He was offering a terrifyingly practical compromise, a bridge between a mob boss and a street doctor. Liam slowly turned his hand over. He let his palm rest against Caleb's fingers. The heat of the contact shot straight up Liam's arm. He didn't mask his scent. He let the cool, sharp aroma of white tea and crushed mint fill the room, wrapping around the heavy cedar wood, balancing it, cooling the fire. Tuesday nights. Liam said, his voice entirely steady. If you show up bleeding, I'm locking the door. Caleb's chest heaved. A low, rumbling sound, part relief, part possessive purr, vibrated in his throat. He wrapped his fingers around Liam's hand, the grip firm, warm, and unbreakable. Tuesday nights, Caleb agreed. It's a deal, Doctor. Outside, the winter wind howled against the frosted glass of the clinic. Inside, the heavy iron doors were finally locked. And for the first time in years, Liam Gallagher didn't feel like he was fighting the war alone. That concludes the intense, gritty romance of Liam and Caleb. What did you think of their hard-earned compromise? If you loved this deeply human take on the Omegaverse, where survival meets undeniable chemistry, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with your friends who love grounded, realistic BL dramas. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Caleb can truly keep the Narrows safe for Liam? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next audio drama.